Welcome, everybody, to the Takeaways edition of the Vegas Nation podcast. I'm your host, Heidi Fang. Today, joined with Pro Football Network's Ian Cummings. He's a draft analyst. I'm so happy to have him here on the show. We're going to break down what all the takes are that he has, what could happen with the Las Vegas Raiders, number 7 pick overall in the first round of the NFL draft. Before we get to Ian, I'm going to make sure that we thank our sponsors, Station Casinos, STN Sports. Make sure you download that app today. We're also presented to you on Blue Wire Networks. All right, Ian, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to join me here on the show today.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. We're less than a month out now. We're finally on the home stretch. It feels like it's been a whirlwind, right? A lot of tape watching, but all of a sudden it's right there on the doorstep. So it's an exciting time for sure.
I still can't get enough of tape watching. I'm one of those people, I just love to digest it. I love to watch it wherever it is. I'm going to click it. I was doing the pro day rundowns on the quarterbacks. Now I'm on to cornerbacks. And then I got to get into the defensive tackles, which is one of the areas that I know the Raiders really need to look at. You have a big generational type player in Jalen Carter right at the top there. But there's also cornerbacks, Christian Gonzalez. There's also the quarterback conversation. So when you start looking at the Raiders' needs, what do you think would be, if they say it's 7, their first pick off the board, granted that it's there?
Yeah, it's a tough conversation, and you kind of led into it well. I mean, of all the teams picking that early, the Raiders are kind of one of the hardest ones to predict because they have needs all across the board. There's not a ton of positions on that roster that I would look at and say, I can't upgrade that, right? There's some where maybe you have a good stopgap, right? A player that, wouldn't necessarily like force you into a corner at that point. But, if there's a prospect that you really like at a certain position and you can upgrade, there's a lot of opportunities to do it across the board. Quarterback is still on the table, even with Jimmy G. If Will Levis is there, I feel like that's a conversation you have to have just because the upside he provides and, that division, the competition that you're facing. But at number 7 overall, I look at Christian Gonzalez as one of the top options for them at corner. He's my CB1, a top 5 prospect for me. And I think especially in that zone heavy scheme, he's one of the guys who, when I think of a zone corner, smooth athleticism in space, route recognition, instincts, ball skills. He's got all that too. Very good explosiveness and closing speed. So, he checks a lot of the boxes for me. And then I know right tackle is a potential need for them. They re-signed Jermaine Illuminor, if I remember correctly. And they have Brandon Parker, who played there a couple seasons ago before he suffered a season-ending injury. I don't know if either of those guys are long-term solutions, though, and it's such a premier position. Let's say a guy like Paris Johnson Jr. is there. He's proven that he can play left or right. Phenomenal athlete. Really, I think he's got 36-inch arms, right? So he's insanely powerful. The upside is through the roof. And again, it's at a high-value position. So it's like, if I don't have a long-term solution there, maybe I should take that if Gonzalez isn't off the board. But it just goes to show, you go down the list, there's a lot of options for them at that point. And you mentioned Jalen Carter. He's a potential option too. I mean, every team is going to have a different discussion regarding the off-field stuff with him. But, you take that out of play, he's a top 3 talent in the class. He's one of the most disruptive defenders, just bar none, right? He's got the explosiveness, the power, the natural leverage. So it's a conversation to have. I think for the Raiders in particular at number 7, before they pick, there's a lot of different ways that the board can play out, and that's going to dictate part of what they do there. But they have options, and depending on how it falls, a pretty good chance a good player is going to be there for them.
Right. In my heart, I hate the conversation at Jalen Carter just because of the fact that the things that happened and transpired, but I don't want to condemn the man either. And at the same time, it's a difficult situation, like you said, coming into Vegas with that past and the reckless driving history and what have you. Well, we know what the incident was where 2 people lost their lives. And so that's where I struggle with that, but I still feel that he's one of those guys that I think will probably actually go earlier than number 7, and then takes that off of the Raiders' hands and having to try to answer that question for themselves. But my question in all of that for you about Jalen Carter is the pro day. When you see the pro day and he's kind of folding himself between the bags and he's not really going through it all, and he's gained the heavy weight, and obviously he's got all of this other outside and external pressure on them. How much weight as a analyst would you put on what you saw in the pro day versus what you've seen from him on film?
It's a tough conversation for an analyst, right? Because I think, one thing that, it's there's something that you don't know there. Like, why did he gain the weight? Why did he look more sluggish? What's going on with him, right? And unfortunately, being an NFL draft analyst, there's some answers that you can't get that NFL teams might have more resources to, pursue, right? Like, what's going on with him? Can we meet with him in person, talk to him one-on-one, see what's going on? Because you mentioned the crash, an unfortunate event. It's one of those things I try not to speak on it definitively because we really don't know, what happened. And there's still some legal proceedings. I think he got acquitted, if I remember correctly. But, it's one of those things where if you don't have all the answers, don't speak on it, right? But, speaking as a young adult myself, that can have an effect on your mental health, which can have an effect on your preparation, right? So you need to be open-minded to that as well, right? So I think it's going to be one of those things where he's still a young guy. He's progressing and, maybe he's made some mistakes in the past, but, each NFL team is going to try and meet with him, I would hope. And each team in consideration for picking him would, I'd hope meet with him one-on-one, talk to him and get a read on, character is complex and you really need to get down to the root of it. So I think the pro day for me, weighing it against the tape is it's pretty phenomenal. It really is. I mean, at his best, he's a phenomenal talent. Like you said, he's got near generational upside as a 3-tech. I think, for me, he's one of the few blue chip talents in this class. And an iffy pro day isn't really going to change that for me. It's different for a guy like Kayshon Boutte, who there have been red flags for him throughout the entire process. And now he doesn't, perform at his pro day. Then it's like, all right, what's going on here? But Jalen Carter, for 2 years, for the better part of 2 years, he was the most dominant force on a stacked Georgia defense, right? So you look at that, it's one of those things where with everything that's going on with him, first you got to make the discernment, are we willing to take him with this stuff going on? Have we determined that, it's not a reflection of his character? He's just a young guy who's still maturing, right? And we can work with that, right? And once you get past that, you're like, all right, the causes of his poor pro day, can we counteract that? Is that something he can, come away from? And I think that's something that each NFL team is going to have to determine because they're the only ones that have the resources to really find those answers.
Yeah. As you look for another prospect, you mentioned Will Levis, right? And I wanted to go to just the tape on this one where you see a guy in 2021 who had a great season, right? Everything was going well for him. Then you go to 2022's tape and it's not as great, is a little bit more concerning. When you try to compare those 2 years for Will Levis, what was it about the 2022 season that changed and how he dealt with that?
Yeah. There's a dichotomy there for sure, and you have to bring up the changes in scenery, right? Changed offensive coordinator, lost a few weapons on offense, Wan'Dale Robinson being the most notable one at wide receiver, lost a few offensive linemen, right? I think Darian Kennard was drafted by the Chiefs, so Luke Fortner to the Jaguars. So he lost a lot of supporting talent and to, go on with that, the shift in coordinators, all of that kind of underlaid a sense of on instability for him heading into the year. And, on top of that, too, he was dealing with injuries throughout the entire season. He was pretty beat up and, carrying his team on his back. So I don't want to go out on a limb and act like I'm making excuses for him because I think it is two-sided. He dealt with a lot of change and that can be tough. But at the same time, when he had opportunities to show linear growth from the previous season, he didn't show it, right? So it's the part of the onus is on Will Levis to kind of work through that and show that growth. And, he didn't quite show that. There was still issues with the field vision and processing at times, anticipation over the middle of the field, a late trigger that can, render some of his passes more risky. And, that's something you want to iron out. And he didn't quite show that. Now, you acknowledge that the setting that he was in wasn't really conducive to growing through that, right? And you'd like to hope that if you give him the proper support in the NFL, that he can take the necessary steps. And then you look at the arm talent, right, at the pro day. I mean, that was pretty distinct. I mean, a flick of the wrist and it goes 40 to 50 yards. So no one is, discussing the arm talent. No one is, contesting that. It's there. It's one of the best arms in the class, if not the best arm in the class. And he's a good athlete too. He's tough. You talk to him, he's personable, he's likable. He's got good character by all accounts. So it's just one of those things where you take the context into account. He was dealing with change. He didn't show the necessary growth. And that's something that might weigh him down for a guy, against a guy like Anthony Richardson, who, has a unicorn level ceiling. And he did show some flashes of growth. He's still very much, a work in progress, but you see the progression work, the processing in the pocket, right? It's streaky, but it is there. The trend up, the upward trajectory that you can project into the future is there more so than it is with Levis. Now, for an NFL team, the whole thing is projective. So it doesn't close the book on Levis. It's just like, it's a little more risky, right? But if we have the proper infrastructure, we can make him what he can be. And at his ceiling, he can be a very good quarterback. So I think, you take it into account, but you also have to be aware of the upside. And if you're willing to bank on it, pull the trigger.
I love that you're contrasting and comparing them because that's actually a few of the things that I had in store for you here. And in terms of Anthony Richardson versus Will Levis, if they're both at 7, let's say they're both available right there. I think Anthony Richardson right now, based off of the combine performance, probably doesn't last there. But if he does for some reason, who would you pick at that point?
Yeah. I would lean Richardson. I think they're both, you can make the upside argument with both guys, and that's something that we've seen throughout the entire process. Will Levis, phenomenal arm talent, very elastic arm on top of the arm strength that he can push it down the field. Anthony Richardson is kind of similar. I think Levis's release is a little more compact, a little more efficient, but Richardson is still one of those guys who, a flick of the wrist and it's going 40 yards. I mean, very, I like to define arm strength as the ease with which you generate velocity. Like anyone
Okay.
can generate high velocity, but some guys with smaller arms are straining more, right? And they do max out at a certain point. And then other guys like Josh Allen, like he doesn't even have to put any effort into it. And the ball is just sailing into the deep third past the defensive back. So it's those guys who, when you encounter pressure in the NFL, you need to be able to generate that velocity, as well as you do when you're not encountering pressure. And Levis, Richardson, they have those arms. Now, they're both good athletes, right? They're both baseline, start there. They're good athletes, but Richardson is a different brand of athlete than Levis. He's a different brand of athlete than Josh Allen, Cam Newton, even. I mean, this guy, the numbers speak for themselves. 4.43 40-yard dash, 40.5-inch vertical, 10.8 broad jump at 6'4", 244. I mean, this guy's a tank with
Right.
rocket propellers on his shoes, right? But it sounds like hyperbole, but you watch the tape and the explosiveness in open field, the foot speed, that's one that I like to use. It sounds a little vague, right, on the surface, but it does matter. How quickly can he reset and redirect? And he's very twitchy. You can see he can change directions very well for his size. He's not one of those lumbering 6'4" guys. Like Josh Allen's a great athlete, but in space, he's more of a linear guy. You see him hurdling guys. He's not going to make you miss, juke you out of your shoes. Richardson can do that, and he can truck through you too. So, Richardson legitimately provides just rare upside. You rarely see a runner like this. People talk about Justin Fields like that after his season last year. I think that's the kind of impact that Richardson can have as a runner, and that's something you can build around early. Unlike with Levis, he's a good athlete, linear athlete in space, but not quite to the level where you can construct an offense and feature that running ability. Richardson has that, and then on top of that, he's young. He's only 21 years old. In contrast with Levis, who's 24, right? So a little bit older. Again, it's not a huge issue because he's got a long shelf life, right? They're both young, but Richardson has a longer developmental track for you. So I think, looking at all those factors, I would lean Richardson. I think they're both good QB prospects, but Richardson, for me, the upside is just, especially when you have Garoppolo as a bridge to help ease him in. He doesn't have to start right away. I think that's a great situation for him, provided that you keep building that offense.
Love it. As we speak about quarterbacks, I want to ask you about one in particular because this keeps coming up as a scenario. So Hendon Hooker, ACL tear, right? I believe it was like late November that happened. So he should probably be getting back to being able to throw and plant his feet maybe this month, if not by next month. But where he can be in terms of preparedness and readiness, I think has a lot of impact on where you look at him in the draft. Overall, I think if it were maybe not for the injury, maybe we're looking at having him in this discussion somewhere towards the top. But because of the injury, we're maybe talking, would you say late first round for Hendon Hooker? And, as Raiders look to maybe increase their value in a draft class and building a culture and bringing in new guys to fill all the different various holes that they have, would you invest in Hendon Hooker?
Yeah, that's an interesting. I mean, he's kind of the wild card of this class, right?
Yeah.
It's that top four, and then we're all looking for who's the next guy after that. Like, what if
Right.
we don't take a guy because all those top four guys are pretty much going to go top 10? We know that by now. Maybe Levis falls a little bit, but probably not because the quarterback tax, right? So who's the next guy up? Hendon Hooker, to me, he's a polarizing one. I mean, the round one talk is a little rich for me personally. I look at, and it's not the conceptual factors, not just that. Obviously, being a 25-year-old rookie isn't ideal, but again, he's pretty young, right? He's a guy who you're still gonna have time with. For me, it's more the offense that he comes from. I think that I'm not sure how translatable it is, and I think there's going to be a bigger adjustment for him. Even guys like Richardson and Levis, right? They have some adjustments to make, but they are in a more pro-ready, pro style. You look at Levis; he does have some progression work now. Within that work, he shows the need for improved anticipation and field vision, but he at least has more experience with traditional dropbacks. With
Okay.
Hendon Hooker, that Tennessee offense, it was a lot of stacked releases, a lot of predetermined throws, where it's basically just Tillman and Hyatt stacked. And it's like, if Hyatt beats his man, boom, that's where the ball's going, right? That was what happened a lot. Now that's, that's kind of, what's the word? Sweeping. It is kind of a generalization. It wasn't all that, right? But it was a higher frequency of that, quicker reads, not traditional dropbacks. And so when you saw him take those traditional dropbacks where he's standing in the pocket a little bit more, he didn't always deal with pressure very well. I think the internal clock can be a little hot and cold for him. And I think, if he gets the ball out well, if he gets the ball out quick, he can be efficient, he can be accurate. But when he's encountering adversity, that's when things start to go a little sideways. Now he does have the athleticism, he has the arm talent. We've seen that. I do think he's not quite at the Levis or Richardson level, but he has good talent, right? You can work with that. For me, it's just like, the transition to the NFL offense. How is that going to impact him? Because a lot was manufactured for him at Tennessee. And that's kind of a concern for me. On top of the ACL, on top of the age, those aren't deal breakers, right? It's just kind of an accumulative effect. So I would probably take him day 2, mid to late
Okay.
day 2 is where I consider him. Round 1 is a little rich for me just because I don't think the talent is at such an elite level for his age and for the offense transitioning questions. But I do think he's talented. All the reviews for his leadership have been very good. Character, he interviews well, and I think that'll help him out. It's just for me, in the NFL, you need to be able to operate within the pocket. And, he has good poise on quick throws, RPOs, he can do that. But let's say you got 2 or 3 reads that you need to get through, right? There's a lot of red flags for me in terms of how
Okay.
he sees the field, how he encounters pressure, how he deals with pressure. He's got the athleticism to do it, to kind of evade and extend, but the poise, the ability to stand in and navigate the pocket, keep his eyes up, that's something that Richardson even showed, and I'm Hooker a little more hesitant with him. I do think day 2 is a good range for him, but
Okay.
anywhere beyond that, I'm a little hesitant. That said, if you're the Raiders and he's there and you can get, premier talent early on and still get Hooker, that's a solid situation, where he doesn't have to start right away. And then by the time he turns 26, 27, 2 Januaries from now, he'll be kind of rolling out the carpet and he'll be able to hit the ground running. I think, there's a scenario where that's good, right? But ultimately, if Richardson or Levis is there, I would rather bank on the higher level talent.
We spoke a little bit about Jalen Carter, and I want to take it back into that direction now with interior defensive line and where you stack up some of the top guys in the draft, or even somebody that you think has a really great spark that can become a great player for the Raiders. Because to me, it seems like Dave Ziegler, Josh McDaniels, they're more invested in building a culture off of smart, intelligent, tough guys that kind of have a chip on their shoulder. Is there somebody that you see in the defensive line, mainly interior defense tackle, that is really got those kind of qualities that you think would make somebody that can become a generational talent for the Raiders?
Yeah, it's an interesting class. Now, I want to preface, it depends on what you're looking for, what type of defensive lineman you're looking for. I know the Raiders, Patrick Graham, he's done 4-3, he's done 3-4. You'd like
Yeah,
to mix it up a little bit on the
yeah.
front. So you need to know, if you need a nose tackle. I know Neil Farrell coming out was primarily a 0-1 tech for the LSU, so they could roll with him. But if you want an upgrade there, there's Siaki Ika, maybe Keanu Benton, a few guys up there. Ben can play 3 tech too. So it just depends on what you're looking for, right? What kind of mold you're looking for. And I'll start at the top of the board because I think Brian Bresee, when guys talk about who's next up after Carter, that's the first name that comes to mind. You're talking about a guy who can maybe be a generational. I won't quite go there, but he's a 5-star recruit. He's got the pedigree. He's insanely explosive on tape. I mean, off the line, and his pro day was phenomenal. I mean, you check that out. Like, it's just, pro days are more of a confirmation. Like, it's not something you want to double count, but he does have very good explosiveness, very good lateral agility, ankle flexion, flexibility, and length too. And then he can use that. He's got violent hands. He's got a working arsenal too. So I think, Bresee to me is one of the more disruptive linemen in the class. And, it's kind of rough for the Raiders because at number 7, that's maybe a little too rich for him, but at the same time, he's not going to last to round 2. So where do you take him? Maybe you trade down a little bit or trade back up if he falls to a certain point. Medicals could be an issue for him. So we'll see. But I'm a big fan of his talent. There's a few more guys down the board. I look at Kalijah Cansey. He's one that's been trending a lot, a little undersized, and that does concern me. But I think he's one of those guys. Now, my projection for him is I'd rather shade him outside a little bit more than he was
Okay.
used. I think he's a guy who can maybe, he's enough of an athlete to play at 5 tech if you need him to, 3 tech, 4 eye within that range. Very explosive, violent, again, super twitchy and flexible. But one guy that I really like in that 3 tech mold too is Adetomiwa Adebawore from Northwestern.
Well
He
done.
made the hey, listen, I was at the Senior Bowl a couple years ago and they had Osa Odigizua, Levi
Sure,
Onwuzurike. So
sure.
I
Yeah.
needed to practice. I needed to practice. But Adebawore is he's a fun player. He made the headlines at the NFL Combine. He ran a 4.49 at around 6'2", 280 with over 34-inch arms. And one thing about, what I really like from interior defensive linemen is when you're like 6'2" or shorter, but you've got over 34-inch arms, right? That's natural leverage. So you can get under guys easier. But with those arms too, you can drive more power. You can hit guys with more force. You can channel that power through your explosiveness. And he can do that. He's got all the tools for it. I love how disruptive he is on tape at his maximum. His hand usage can still be refined a little bit. He can be a little uncontrolled sometimes. But if you're looking for a 3 tech to, play alongside a nose tackle and let him disrupt one-on-one, Adebawore is definitely up there on my list. And then I'll throw a few more names out there. I really
Yeah,
like this.
please.
I really like this interior defensive line class. I think especially in the day 2 range, if that's where you're looking, there's a lot of fun players. Keanu Benton, I mentioned him earlier.
Yes.
Big fan of his tape. I think he played nose a lot at Wisconsin. I do think he can stay there, but at the same time, I think maybe he's a little bit better shading outside because he's another violent, heavy-handed guy. He's got a wicked swim move, arm over. I mean, he's so quick at that. But then he's got the length to pry through, very good strength, really good stack and shed and run defense too. Another guy who's got 3 down utility. Zach Pickens from South Carolina is another one that I'm a big fan of. He doesn't get a ton of hype, but he's got a top 75 grade for me. He's explosive, around 6'3", over 300 pounds. I think over 34-inch arms again. So natural leverage, proportional length, common theme there, but that's a good combination to have. And again, he's one of those guys who comes off the line very quickly, just a very well-rounded, sound defender. And then Moro Ajomo from Texas. I've been tweeting about him a lot, but he was a guy who at the Shrine Bowl, he stood out. He was phenomenal using his power generation to blast guys backward on 1 rep against Jarrett Patterson, I want to say. Or no, not Jarrett Patterson. I forgot who it was, but on 1 rep, he just drove his guy back like 10 yards and just like straight, just kept going. He's around 6'3", 292. And he's got 34.5-inch arms. So again, natural leverage, proportional length, and that shows up on tape at Texas. He's a very good run defender because he can just get right in guys, and then he uses that length to establish an anchor and just hold its positioning too. A little unrefined as a pass rusher, but again, that natural leverage, that power profile, and then I think he had somewhere in the 5s, 40-yard dash, a 33-inch vertical. So he's an athlete too. So he's one of those guys where, just get him in your room. He's got the tools to mold. And he was one guy that I got to interview at the Shrine Bowl. You talk about intelligence. I mean, the dude is crazy smart. I mean, we were talking to him about cryptocurrency for a little bit. Like he was going into financial analysts and stuff. So, he's going to have a future after football. But, in the meantime, Moro Ajomo has all the tools to be a game wrecker on the line. I think those are some of the guys that stand out to me. I'm blanking on nose tackles after Siaki Ika, but Ika is one guy from Baylor that I'm a big fan of too. I think on day 2 is where you can really get value for him, but his 2021 tape was a little bit better than his 2022. But he's a guy who, his flashes at his maximum potential, he's got some crazy pass rushing ability for his size. He's got to be more consistent. One thing that's often a concern with nose tackles, especially, is like their stamina. Can you go 100% from snap to snap? I think that's something he's still working on, but he's one of the stronger guys in this class. I mean, he can hold double teams very well. Mozzie Smith from Michigan is another guy kind of in that mold. I think he's one guy who I want to see him deliver on the traits more often. There's some times where, he doesn't hold up quite as well as you'd expect him to with his strength, but he's another one who's super athletic. The flashes are there. He's got lateral agility for his size. He's got explosiveness. He's got heavy hands. He can move past guys, so I think a lot of potential and a lot of different molds, and I could keep going down the list, but
I can tell. I don't even know how you retain all of this. It's just in there.
It's just
It's
it builds up
crazy.
through the cycle. Like, I'll be honest, like, I'll just
I
like
love it.
it's honestly like this part of the cycle is like, people talk about it like it's the home stretch. This is where it all
Mhm.
builds up. But
Mhm.
I've done all the work already. So just kind of,
There you go.
I've got to get it all out now. I've got to start rattling it off. But it's
I love it.
yeah, the moral of the story is this defensive tackle class, a lot of contrasting styles, but a lot of fun players. And I think you could double up too if you want to. I know the Raiders have 12 picks, so I think it's a good opportunity to do that as well.
All right, now I've got a contrast and comparison for you again, and this time is going to be with cornerbacks because
Mhm.
I've felt a lot of, reading a lot of different things that Devin Witherspoon, Christian Gonzalez are two that seem to be right in that top 10 area as well. How would you compare and contrast their skills? And if again, flipping it back to this, if you're at the 7 spot, do you grab Christian over? I think you said that earlier that you would, but Christian and Devin, what would be the reasons for taking Christian there at 7?
Mhm. Yeah, I think those are my top two corners for sure. And I think that's kind of the general consensus in this class, right? It's
Mhm.
not like other classes where it's kind of up in the air. That's kind of who it is, right? It's Gonzalez and Witherspoon kind of up top. Deontay Banks has been moving up recently, and on my rewatch of him, I came away more impressed. So I'll move him up for sure. But I think you're looking at Gonzalez or Witherspoon for number 7. And for me personally, I lean Gonzalez, and that's not a slight to Witherspoon. They're both phenomenal prospects. I think, one thing that when they're that close, right? Sometimes you got to lean toward the athletic ceiling. And
Yeah.
Witherspoon is a phenomenal athlete. I don't think he tested, but on tape you can see the speed is not a concern. The closing speed is not a concern. I mean, he can cover guys, he can run with them, and he's very twitchy, very high energy athlete in short and close quarters too. That's one thing I really like because if you're a cornerback, you can't get caught flat footed. You got to be on the move all the time.
Mhm.
And Devin Witherspoon is one guy who exudes that constant energy where he can just match guys just like that. But Gonzalez, to me, I think he measured in around 6'1", around 200 pounds. He's got length, right? But then at the same time, I think he ran in the 4.3s, I want to say, over 40-inch vertical. So he's
Yeah.
explosive, he's fast, and that shows up on tape too. I mean, he's one guy who it's effortless for him. It really is. I mean, some guys have to strain, really drive their knees when they're accelerating, but he just does it, like it's second nature, gearing up and tracking guys downfield. It's very easy for him. Everything is easy. And on top of the explosiveness, I mean, for his size too, very fluid. Often with guys that are 6'1" or taller, it can be tough for them to redirect and sink their hips and really change directions to match with guys. It's one reason why, some people were a little hesitant with Tariq Woolen last year. Part of probably why
Okay.
he fell to round 5, and then he ends up going and becoming a phenomenal player with the Seahawks. But I think, Christian Gonzalez a little bit shorter, right? So he doesn't quite have that issue. But even at 6'1", he's incredibly fluid. He transitions effortlessly in open space. And, he's very good at, he's very intelligent too. His eyes are always in the right spot in zone coverage. He can change directions on a dime and make plays when the ball's in the air. I mean, I love the zone skill set for him, but I also think he has the easy athleticism and the discipline, and coverage too, to play and press and off man and really be that guy. So, it's close for each of them. I think Witherspoon right now is a little more physical, which is kind of weird, the smaller of the two, but he's definitely more physical. He's an alpha. He's got a chippy mentality. But Gonzalez is not a slouch by any means. He plays with swag. He's got really good athleticism, really good length, ball skills. I think he just checks more boxes at the end of the day,
Okay.
but they're both really good cornerback prospects. And I would consider both of them. It's just when they're that close, I go with the better size speed profile.
This has been great, and I just have a couple more for you. I just want to get all of the with all the stats
Yeah.
you've been holding in there. I want them all. Okay, so here's 2 more. Defensive end. Who's your favorite pick?
Defensive end.
Yeah.
Are you talking 3-4 defensive end or edge rusher?
Well, I guess edge rusher. I'd rather see edge rusher for the Raiders and get some more exterior, somebody to set outside of Max.
I got you. And is this
Yeah.
round 1 exclusively, or can
No,
we go down the board?
no,
Okay.
just anyone.
All right. Well, if they did go round 1,
Okay.
I would think it's tough because of that pick. Will Anderson's off the board, obviously. I mean, he's not going to last through the top 5. I think maybe Tyree Wilson is off the board. Maybe he's not.
Right.
There's a few power rushers that I would like. Wilson is one that I would consider. I think it's really interesting because they're all kind of similar. Tyree Wilson, Miles Murphy from Clemson, and then Lucas Van Ness from Iowa is the other one that's been considered there. They're all pretty high on my board. I think Tyree Wilson is the one that's gotten the most hype to this point. Really violent, really powerful, 6'6", 275 pounds, 36-inch arms, right? So that's kind of, power is a function of your explosiveness, your length, how much can you channel, and he's got it all. Like he's got, whatever the maximum power capacity is for a player, he's pretty close to that point. I mean, he's incredibly proficient at driving forward and blasting tackles off their spot. And he's got flashes of good hand usage on tape too. He's got a cross chop swim that he's shown. I think that he can develop into a game wrecker on the edge, with the proper development. I think Miles Murphy, for me, he's the highest one out of those three right now. I think his athleticism is very translatable. Again, you go back to foot speed, stride frequency. I mean, he's such a high energy athlete for his size, and he's around 6'5", 265. I think his pro day is going to be early April, so we'll get to see the testing numbers, but he is a phenomenal athlete, a phenomenal specimen, and then his length as well. He can drive power forward, very good at driving into the torso and maximizing that exertion, getting guys off their spot, and he can stack moves off of it too. I think Lucas Van Ness he's the most raw of those three. He's pretty much just a power rusher right now, which is okay. You can stack off of that, you can build off of that. I think he's explosive, right? He's got lateral athleticism. I like Van Ness too because he can play at 5-tech. He can play outside. You can rotate him in, though, as well. He showed he could play 3-tech at Iowa, even at his size, and still be disruptive. And he's also very good. Often with taller guys, they're not always the best at dropping their hips and fully acquiring leverage into contact. Yeah. Lucas Van Ness does it without even any second thought. Like, it's just, he drops his hips and instantly gets inside the torso. He's just so natural at it for a 6'5" guy. It's not normal for a guy that size to so effortlessly drop and acquire leverage. And so I think that's something that he can build off of and be very good at the next level. He's got the longest developmental track because his hand usage isn't quite there yet, but he's one of those guys that I really like. I think those three are in consideration at number 7. If you pass up on those guys, though, the day 2 range is flush with options. I mean, again, there's guys, Derek Hall from Auburn. I'll just throw out a few names. They're going to be rapid fire. Just kind of,
that's great.
It's like one of those lotto machines in my head, just like whichever one pops in, But I think Derek Hall from Auburn is one that I like. He tested well. He's got really good speed to power. This isn't a player comp, but just stylistically, Arnold Ebiketie from the last year's cycle, he went second round of the Falcons. Reminds me a little bit of him. Just he's around 6'3", 250s, but he's got almost 35-inch arms, so very powerful. He can drive that power with that profile, and he's got pretty good hand usage too. I look at Isaiah Foskey if he's there in round 2. I'm a big fan of him in round 2. Really good value. Another guy who's explosive, high energy, hot motor, really good speed to power, very good run defender as well. BJ Ojulari, if you're looking for a stand-up edge rusher, stand-up OLB, he's a finesse rusher, but he's explosive. Again, very agile, and he can use hand moves to win around the apex. So big fan of him. Will McDonald, Iowa State, another guy who really flashed the Senior Bowl. He's an interesting case because he was actually, I think, misused at Iowa State. They put him at 4-eye a lot, which is kind of weird, inside the tackle. Yeah. And he's a guy who's like 6'4", high 230s. So it's like not a guy that you'd expect to play there. But I think in the NFL, where he's going to be outside the tackle more often, he's explosive. He's got bend. He's got lateral agility. He's got a working arsenal of hand moves. So, I think especially with a team like the Raiders, opposite Max Crosby, he was coming out. He was one of those guys who had the length, the athleticism, just really needed to hone it. And he did. Yeah. And, he's become a Pro Bowler. So I think Will McDonald could follow a similar track. There's so many more. Isaiah McGuire from Missouri is one that I like a lot. He's around 6'4", 270. So he's got a really good power profile, but he's explosive. He's actually pretty bendy too for his size. There's some pretty surprising flashes on tape of him turning the corner and kind of apexing and, getting around the tackle and breaching the pocket. And then he played against Broderick Jones at Georgia, and he really drove him back with power a couple of times. I mean, it was not the mismatch that you would expect from a first-round pick like Broderick Jones. Isaiah McGuire gave him trouble. So on day 3, if he's still there, I would love to get those traits in-house. But this edge class is very fun. I think even in the later rounds, there's some guys who flash at the Shrine Bowl that could be very good developmental options. I think especially for the Raiders, if you're looking to not only add a talent opposite Crosby, but also get developmental talent, kind of increase the depth of that unit. You need a deep rotation at the edge position. You always need that. And I think, if you can never have enough pass rushers, this is a great class to add more.
I love that. Thanks so much for all of your time. The last question was, what are you working on? What can we find? Where can we find all of the work that you're putting out from your analysis?
Yeah, so right now I'm just working on scouting report rewrites, just kind of going through, making sure that we've covered all our bases, right? There are a few reports that we need to kind of add updates to, right? So just getting that going, and that's an arduous process, right? But we're kind
Sure.
of crossing our T's and dotting our I's at this point. We're almost there. But you can find my work at IC draft or IC_draft on Twitter. That's where I'm, posting clips about, pro days and stuff like that. That's kind of where we're at right now too, following the pro days, as you mentioned earlier. A lot of interesting information coming from that. But yeah, aside from that, mock drafts occasionally, but we're almost there. We are under a month away. So it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a little bittersweet when it's finally all over, but it's been a fun process. And thank you for having me on. I appreciate it as well.
Appreciate it again. That's Ian Cummings, profootballnetwork.com. You find him on Twitter at IC_, just like he said. Draft is the final word there. So thank you again so much for your time. I want to remind everybody here listening to hit subscribe and also check out all of our other podcasts that we have on vegasnation.com. For Ian Cummings, I'm Heidi Fang. Thank you so much for checking out the show.